Hi, everyone, and welcome to Understanding Effective Segmentation in a PCI-compliant Environment. I'm Emily Paddock from Tevora's Account Management Team, and today Jason Peters, Managing Director of Tevora's Payment Practice, and Vivian Toro, Product Manager at Illumio, will take us through a deep dive into what an optimized PCI segmentation architecture looks like using real-time visibility tools. If there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go and then at the end. So to kick this off, I'd like to give you a little background. Tevora has been doing consulting work in the information security risk and compliance space for 16 years. We have over 100 consultants on staff that specialize in enterprise risk assessments, pen testing, data privacy, solution advisory and implementation, and point-in-time security compliance frameworks like PCI. Illumio is a cybersecurity leader in delivering segmentation solutions, which prevents the spread of breaches inside data centers, public cloud, hybrid cloud, and bare metal virtual environments. Enterprise lean on Illumio and Tevora to reduce cyber risk and achieve regulatory compliance. So with that, Jason, the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to talk to people about segmentation today. It seems like it's a topic that never really goes away in PCI, even though it's been around for some time. So we'll just jump right in. And one of the things I'm going to do is just make sure I give you the opportunity to ask questions and try to answer any questions that come up. Today, I'll be presenting first and then be turning it over to Vivian to show you the Illumio solution and provide some of their background and insights into segmentation. Today, I'm going to be just giving you really the bare bones kind of PCI, what is segmentation to PCI and the PCI SSC, and how do we as QSAs deal with segmentation and test it. So who am I? I've been a QSA since the start of PCI. I was actually in the first class of QSAs. So I've been doing this a long time. I don't know if that's good or bad some days, but I still have a passion for it. I love PCI. I think it's a great framework to work in, and I think it helps out a lot of organizations. We've seen vast improvements since the inception of PCI and the DSS 1.0, and I think segmentation is one of those areas where we've continued to see improvements in the guidance, in the insights, and with our customers, we see a lot of improvements on how they're actually implementing segmentation, how they're dealing with these scoping strategies. So with that being said, we'll go in. So what are the objectives today? What am I going to learn? And I think one of the keys here is that, we want to look at the PCI requirements for compliance, right? So what are you required to do for PCI and segmentation? What are the requirements that are specific to segmentation? What are the benefits? Why should I even worry about segmentation? Are there benefits? If there's PCI requirements, is it something that I just have to do, or are there other benefits to the organization? When we talk about segmentation, we're really talking about scope and the applicability of requirements to technologies, process, and people. And so how do we get to a level of segmentation where we're able to effectively impact that scope on our people, process, technology? And then demonstrating adequate segmentation. We have a level of segmentation that's been developed. When somebody comes in to test or to assess our environment, whether it be a QSA or internal audit, what are we trying to show them to demonstrate that we have appropriate segmentation? So some of the webinar details and what I'm going to do today is after each section, I'll pause, see if there's any questions. And I really just want to address a couple of quick questions just to kind of make the discussion a little bit more organic if there are questions. If I don't answer your questions, we'll have an extended question and answer period at the end of the prepared material. So Well, I'll give you some breaks, in between the transition from my part of the presentation over to Vivian. I'll see if there's any questions then. And then after the end of Vivian's presentation, we'll open it up to a question and answer period. If your question isn't answered, please feel free to reach out. We're here to help people out, and don't feel like at the end of the webinar, you have a question or one comes up later. Please feel free to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to sit down and put together an answer for you. And then, of course, we keep talking about questions, but are there any questions before we jump in, or anything anybody wants to address? Emily, do we have any questions coming up?
Nope, nothing yet.
All right, so we'll go ahead. Let's jump in. So I think the number one question I get around segmentation is, what are the DSS requirements? What is the standard actually saying in regards to a requirement for segmentation? And we really have to look at it in three different ways, right? When we look at segmentation, we have to really break it down, because the concept of segmenting data, technology, personnel, process can really be summed up in three different categories for PCI. Customer-based, we have to segment our customers when we're service providers. We can't just let them commingle data. We have a lot of implications. And while that's important, that's not really the segmentation we're talking about today. We're not talking about just segmenting your customer data, but it's one area where I get a lot of questions. Are there requirements around customer segmentation? There are requirements within the DSS for this. In the context of today's segmentation discussion, we're not going to focus in on that. Classification-based, right? Classification-based is when we classify our data. Is it PCI data? Is it not PCI data? How much security do we want to implement? Do we want this different types of data to be in scope? We think about the types of data that we get and we aggregate. We want to do analytics over. But once we start introducing some of this credit card data, I try to stay away from the term, but people talk about infectious, non-infectious sometimes within the world of PCI. And we really want to look at, if PCI data is there, it's going to be in scope. And again, this type of data commingling isn't really the focus today when we talk about segmentation. We're talking today about network-based segmentation. What are the requirements around network-based segmentation or systems-based segmentation in PCI, and what are the implications? So I think we got to really first just answer the question at its basic: what are the PCI DSS requirements for segmentation? And there's a short answer, right? When we talk about network segmentation, there really is no specific requirement that says you have to use network-based segmentation. I know a lot of people by now are kind of scratching their heads and like, well, we're having this big discussion around segmentation. So we're going to talk about network segmentation, but there's no requirement for it. There's not a requirement where you have to show evidence of network-based segmentation, but there's a huge impact when you don't have network-based segmentation. And that's with the lack of network-based segmentation, then everything inside of your environment becomes in scope. And I'll just kind of let that sit there for a second, because when we think about the concept of everything being in scope, it's not just that, hey, they're going to have to look at this now for PCI. It's the examination for your ability to comply with the DSS, but it's also the requirement you're going to have to do all of your log monitoring against your entire environment, your file integrity monitoring. So the technology that you're using to protect cardholder data have to be on all of these systems. And now there's, a requirement when you don't have segmentation. Now your printers are in scope. Are you managing your printers to the same level as you would your servers within your PCI cardholder data environment? So there's a big impact there. Although there's not a specific requirement that you have to be able to check off, so to speak, or demonstrate, yes, we have a network segmentation strategy. But there's big implications, and I'll go through some of those and kind of the benefits of segmentation. So I think one of the big questions, after what is required, for segmentation is, should I even invest in it? As an organization, it's an investment. And like any other investment, we want a return on that investment. So investing in the network segmentation, you really get your return in a couple different ways. And one is your ability to maintain your compliance program. So PCI DSS, anybody who's worked in this space knows that it's expensive endeavor. You're spending money on file integrity monitoring. Logging is probably the biggest one people associate with the ongoing cost, because depending on the solution, you could have an EPS or events per second, and without appropriate network segmentation, you're required to send all of the logs within your environment. To a centralized logging solution, obviously your events per second is going to just be astronomical. So getting that return on investment really is starting to pare down those controls and the associated costs with those controls. Logging, monitoring, file integrity monitoring. So those are the big things. Additionally, if you have older technologies in your environment, what are you going to do to address those older technologies? Segmentation can help you get those out of scope for PCI. The biggest thing, I keep saying it, but each in-scope system, process, or person, right? Because security and PCI definitely have the same concept, where it's not just a technology, it's not just a piece of data. There really is a triad of people, process, technology. All of those things, those systems, those networks, all those things work together. And within the scope of PCI, all of them have to be tested and accounted for. And I give a couple examples here of, your, again, file integrity monitoring, logging, your quarterly reviews, regular training of personnel. So it's not just, let's get that network segmentation to get the systems out of scope, but the people who are working on those systems, let's get them out of scope. They can't access the cardholder data. You don't have to sit there and give them the same types of training. We should. Right? I'm a big advocate of training, but when we look at the program and the cost associated with maintaining the program, that is an area that we have to be concerned with. And the right segmentation strategies can reduce entire requirements from applicability. Now, that's the big thing, is applicability, right? Because you don't just get to drop the requirement, but you have to demonstrate, does it apply to your environment? And using the right network segmentation can definitely do that. It can show people who are going to read your reports on compliance, who are going to examine your self-assessment questionnaires, to be able to demonstrate to them, hey, these requirements aren't applicable in our environment because we've taken the strategy of segmentation that is now eliminating these other technologies, these other processes, these other personnel from impacting the security of our cardholder data. So what is enough, right? So, as a QSA, as somebody who tests environments, somebody who's managed programs, what is enough? What do I need to do to really show I'm doing the right thing as far as segmentation is concerned? So this is going to be an interesting answer, right? So I'm working with a partner, but I'll say there is no blanket technology that will solve your segmentation strategy. And that's not to say that I'm speaking against the partner here. What I'm saying is there's no silver bullet, right? You have to take everything with a grain of salt. You have to build a program. So technologies have to be accompanied with proper processes. They have to be documented in policies and procedures. And you're looking at that people, process, technology. Now later on, when I turn it over to Vivian, she's going to show you a really great product. But remember, it's the product, but then you have to build those processes. You have to build those policies and procedures. And Vivian will be able to demonstrate how their solution addresses that and can help you with it. So remember, it's not just the one thing. You're not just going to say, hey, we bought a firewall, or hey, we invested in a technology. There's a number of things that as a QSA, as somebody testing the environment, we're going to look at. So it's the overall environment, right? It's the context. We have to take the data, we have to take the assertion of segmentation, and we have to use that within the context of the overall environment. What are we seeing in the environment? Now, when we talk about the segmentation, there's going to be different connections that could impact whether something gets brought into scope. But it's the totality of the strategy, the people, process, and technology that we have to look at and really measure against. It's not something that we can just take kind of on face value and say, yeah, you've deployed a great solution, or you have a firewall. Even with the Illumio solution, we're still going to look at the rules. What are the rule sets that are there? How are they being managed? How are you reviewing them on a regular basis? And when we talk about what is enough, how often are you testing the effectiveness of your segmentation strategy to ensure that it's still appropriate for the environment? And then how do you prove it, right? And that's what we're talking about when we talk about testing the environment, testing your segmentation strategy. How do we prove it's enough? And I use this a lot, but it's the totality of the environment and segmentation strategies. I'm sorry, I heard something on the call. There was somebody trying to chime in. Okay. It's the totality of the environment and segmentation strategies that we really want to see. Do you have the right processes in place? Do you have people who are knowledgeable managing these technologies and processes? And then is the technology still deployed in an effective manner? And some of the key concepts, is it in place, right? It's kind of the first question we'll ask people is, hey, you've made the assertion that you have a segmentation strategy and that you've segmented your environment. Is it in place? Is it still in place? Is it effective, right? So it's not just, hey, you have a firewall, but do you have that firewall functioning in an appropriate manner? Have you turned on the rules? Are there any permit any? Is it being monitored and tested? And when we talk about monitoring and testing in PCI, we're really talking about monitoring on a continual basis, not just for alerts. A lot of people kind of stop at, well, I get alerts if there's a security incident or a potential incident, or we see something that goes bump in the night. We're monitoring for that, and absolutely you should. But are you also monitoring for the solution to be maintained appropriately? Are patches coming out? Are there security risks associated with your segmentation strategy? Are you applying those patches in a timely manner? Are you going back and looking at the rules that are in place? Is it being tested? When we talk about segmentation testing, there's really a couple different ways it can be tested. One is penetration testing. I think that one most people, both merchants and service providers, are required to do at least annually, and it's the and part that I think a lot of people kind of forget about, and after any major change in the environment. So we make these changes and we don't test again. So did our segmentation strategy break down? Did we leave a hole open? Or did we create a hole by the changes we made? And then being maintained, and that's what I was talking about earlier when we talked about monitoring and patching. Is it something that can be properly maintained? And when we talk about this, we are looking at the policies and procedures. Do you have a process in place, and is it governed appropriately that, when I leave from testing your environment or looking at your cardholder data environment, do I feel comfortable that your segmentation strategy is still going to be there? We look at policies and procedures, and then we look at the historical. We look at the changes that have been going on. Look at the change tickets. Did each change, if it was a major change, have a corresponding test, penetration test, or segmentation test at a minimum that occurred afterward? Did you do that to revalidate your segmentation strategy? And do you have appropriate evidence to speak to that? So I'm going to pause right there. We kind of covered a lot, and like I said, we're really speaking specifically to PCI, but I want to give people an opportunity to ask any questions, or for me to answer any questions that might have come in while I was speaking. So Emily, maybe, do we have any questions at this point?
How often do people need to test the effectiveness?
That's a great question. So when we talk about testing the effectiveness of your segmentation strategies, I'm going to give you a couple of different answers here. So the first answer is, kind of the black and white letter of the law that's laid out within the DSS. They say, and we'll talk about merchants first. If you're a merchant, you're really talking about annually you're doing a penetration test, and it should include testing the effectiveness of your segmentation strategy. And then as a service provider, you're called out to do a penetration test that should include testing the segmentation effectiveness. And then additionally, approximately 6 months later, you should be doing at least just a segmentation test to prove out that your segmentation strategy is still effective. Now, those are kind of the black and white ones, but then there's a third one that's written in the DSS, which is after any major change, you should be doing penetration testing. And that should include testing the effectiveness of your segmentation strategy. So you have the clear cut, right? Merchants, at least annually. Service providers should be semi-annually. So one with a full penetration test, another just a segmentation test. And then there's the other one that they leave open to the organization is after any major change. Now, I think the logical question after that statement is, well, what's major, right, in PCI? They're leaving it up to you as an organization to identify what a major change is in your environment. And as a QSA, when I come in and I ask you, hey, did you do penetration tests after any major changes? I'm looking, whether you say yes or no, I'm also going to be looking for, well, what's your definition of a major change in your environment? Do you have a definition, and did you perform, at a minimum, a risk assessment to say, yeah, maybe after this change, we should do a penetration test. We should at least make sure our segmentation is still working. There's never going to be a time when you test too much, but there is a time when you can exhaust people, right, by overly testing this. I think one of the keys when we talk about testing segmentation and the effectiveness is really taking the environment and saying, what is an effective way to demonstrate that I can't just make arbitrary connections? And that's what we're talking about, is an arbitrary connection. Am I making our connections that should be permitted allowed, and connections that shouldn't be permitted, are those being filtered appropriately? Are they being addressed correctly? Now, some people in the past have said, well, I can't ping it. And I would say that depending on your hardening strategy on your regular desktops and servers, maybe you shouldn't be able to ping it anyway, but I get that that's a discussion for another time. But my point is more so, it has to be more than just, can I ping it, right? It has to be a test. Now, it could be simple. It could be, utilizing something like InMap. And the PCI SSC, if you want additional guidance on segmentation testing, excuse me, the Security Standards Council put out penetration testing guidelines on the website. And within those, they actually talk about segmentation testing, and they give you a little bit more layers on what you can do. But one of the things they do discuss is that the utilization of InMap would be acceptable. Now, is it effective, right? Acceptable and effective aren't always the same thing. And I think that's something that many people will have to work with their QSA or the testing individual to appropriately identify. And it really all comes back to, did the organization do a risk assessment? We want to use InMap to do our testing. At some point, technical and business personnel have analyzed that and said, yeah, we feel that running InMap in this way, using these flags or these modifiers, is effective to test the segmentation that we have in our environment. So hopefully I answered that question. Emily, do we have more questions?
Nope, that's the only one so far.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I give the presentation over to Vivian, our partner at Illumio, and I will allow her to go through their product.
Thank you, Jason, and the Tevora team for this opportunity to share with you how Illumio can help improve your PCI scoping and segmentation projects. And good morning to all. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to presentation mode. All right, perfect. Now, so for this section, I'm going to cover the following topics. I'll provide a brief overview of our typical customers' environment and the PCI challenges that they face when they first come to Illumio. And then I'll go over the traditional approaches that these customers have either evaluated or have tried to solve their PCI East-West segmentation challenges. Then I'll segue into Illumio's approach, and I'll conclude with a quick 10-minute demo. So let's begin. PCI starts with the assumption that everything is in scope. I think that Jason mentioned that earlier, and he also mentioned that running a PCI program can be very expensive. So a lot of our customers were really looking to reduce their scope, but do it in a way so that they're not inadvertently exposing their company to a major data breach. And the PCI Standards Council actually published a scoping and segmentation best practice guide in 2016, and then they updated this in May 2017. And so what you see here is their framework. The best practice guide recommends that you start by identifying your CDE, plus all the systems that are in the same network as a CDE. Then you go and look to identify, the system components that they consider as connected to, as well as security impacting systems. So these two groups are considered in scope for PCI, and everything else, which you see at the bottom, are what you call out of scope systems. And then, you apply your segmentation strategies accordingly. Now, our customers have told us that doing this in practice is actually not always very easy, and we'll go to that in detail in the next two slides. So a lot of our customers have told us that increasing complexity in their architecture is one of the reasons that makes scoping and segmentation very tricky. And this is a simplified representation of our typical customer environment. So they will typically have like 2 or more data centers, and then their application components that hold the CDE and the SAD are striped across these data centers. They also have remote offices where they have point-of-sale terminals and payment applications. They also have other payment channels like that, which adds to the complexity. So they're either using Square, they're using Venmo, other payment platforms, and then they also have secure connections to their acquiring bank, a shopping site for their online business, portal for their remote workers, and then they have integration with third-party cloud services like those that manage their customer loyalty program or their content platform for their online shopping. So that's the complexity in their payment infrastructure. And then to make that even more complex, they're also talking about the complexity in their data center. And so what you see here is on the left, which is the traditional data center, which is relatively, self-contained. But today's data centers are different, and this is what you see on the right, where they have like multiple data centers. It's multi-cloud. They're using multiple compute resources. It's virtualized. They're dipping their toes into containers. They're also doing either DevOps or doing a lot of IT automation. And so a lot of this complexity poses a couple of challenges for them with regards to visibility and security. So first of all, they always ask themselves, like, how do I keep track of all these changes so that I'm able to update my firewall rules accordingly? And then they also want to be able to reduce the attack surface. And then from a PCI standpoint, their challenge is how do they keep track of their CDE, the connected systems, the security impacting systems, so that they can ensure that their out-of-scope systems are always properly segmented. So when the customers come to us for help, they do so because their existing approaches for PCI segmentation aren't working. So they have either failed their PCI pen test, and their QSA said that they have serious segmentation errors, or they've been told by their acquiring bank or another partner that they need to fix this within a given time frame, or the bank will no longer process their payments, or they're in a breach of contract, because as we all know, PCI is a supply chain and ecosystem of partners. And then they tell us that these are some of the common segmentation errors that they face. One is they haven't properly defined their scope. So their network and data flow diagrams are out of date. They have underscoped their PCI environments. They can't verify their connected to and their out-of-scope systems. The second one is, they haven't properly segmented their CDE or their PCI systems from their out-of-scope systems. And we see more of this happening as customers are adopting shared services infrastructure, as well as, adopting multi-cloud or hybrid cloud environments. And lastly, it's, they say that, they've been told that they have either outdated or misconfigured firewall rules. And see here, we have customers who say that their QSAs told them that their network's too flat, they have poor change management processes, so they have a lot of ports that are open than they need to be. The other thing that customers tell us is, outside of failing their PCI audits or having their, acquiring bank issue a warning and a deadline, is they're worried that poor segmentation also increases their exposure to a lateral movement attack. And so we are all familiar with the MITRE attack framework. So just as a quick recap, lateral movement is a tactic wherein a bad actor will target seemingly low-value systems. So for example, they use a combination of spear phishing and social engineering one of the employees, and then they spread the malware laterally across the data center to find a route that would allow them to compromise the CDE. And then once your malicious actor is inside the target systems, they copy or exfiltrate the data or the cardholder data. Now, PCI has been around for at least 10 years, and the technologies for networking and segmentation have been around for far longer. And customers to date have been using large data center firewalls. They've been using SDN to do east-west segmentation of their PCI environment. But because of the increasing complexity and increasing scale in the data center, they're facing some challenges in terms of how they were able to do this effectively and efficiently. So when the customers come to us, typically after trying and failing to use a combination of large data center firewalls and SDNs to segment their east-west traffic for PCI, these are some of the realities that they've shared with us. First of all, they say it's really slow because they don't have real-time visibility into what's going on in their environment, and because their legacy tools have multiple administration points, they end up with very slow and lengthy deployments because they worry about breaking critical applications and transactions. Secondly, it's complicated. Since policies are tied to IP addresses, keeping track of IP addresses, the firewall order, it can be a very painful exercise for whoever is in charge of managing these segmentation projects. So many organizations, as we all know, have very bad firewall change management practices. First, and then third, it's expensive, and we're not going to go into detail on that because I think that's a pretty obvious reason. And then lastly, it's risky and complicated. So, customers, they worry about going down the rabbit hole of re-architecting their network to isolate their PCI environment, and then they worry about breaking their critical applications. So we believe that we can do better. And to do that, it requires a new approach wherein when you segment your PCI environment, you don't necessarily have to rely on your networking and firewall constructs. And to do this, you don't have to keep up with all the lines of firewall rules and their orders. And also, each host already have their native enforcement points. So you should be able to take advantage of those native enforcement points. So as a result, you avoid the risk and cost of re-architecting your network, buying more hardware, and also hiring a ministry of segmentation. And to do this, you need a couple of things. You need a way to group things logically so that it's easier to express and manage your policies and do it in using natural language. You also need a map to show you the applications, the connections, the flows. This is the application's behavior. And then lastly, you need to be able to do this at scale without breaking the application, which means that you need a way to model, test your policies before you go into full enforcement. And lastly, because, as customers told us, their payment, their data centers, they're more complex, they're more dynamic, they told us time and time again that they need a way to be able to keep up with change. So that way, if they're adding more resources, compute resources, or if they're migrating a workload from one data center into another, they're quickly able to detect these changes, it's reflected in their, their real-time application dependency map. And at the same time, they're able to recalculate and recommend applicable firewall rules, and they're able to do this at scale. So when you think about, what customers are doing today in terms of, their current state and then their future state, where they're investing in more virtualization, they're adopting multi-cloud, hybrid cloud architectures, they're trying to use containers or containerize some of their applications, or they're using DevOps and other IT orchestration tools. They need to be able to keep up with these changes and be able to segment quickly. So you want your segmentation to be dynamic, and you want to be able to do this at scale. And Illumio can help you with this. So just to quickly summarize how we help you with this, it will help you build a map of your environment, the applications, the connections and flows, the dependencies. You then use this map to identify and validate your PCI environment as well as your out-of-scope systems. And then Illumio recommends the applicable firewall rules based on the application's normal behavior. So then you can also choose the appropriate level of granularity, so whether you can do coarse-grained segmentation or ring fencing, all the way down to segmenting according to the port, process, and protocol. And then lastly, Illumio is dynamic, so if there are any changes in your workload connections in your environment, it automatically recalculates and recommends the applicable firewall rules. So this helps you eliminate, your out-of-date, misconfigured firewall rules for the east-west traffic in your PCI environment. So before I go into the demo, I do want to give you a quick overview of how the product works. So we have built two pieces of software. The first one is what we call the VEN, or the Virtual Enforcement Node. This is the agent that you install in the workload that you want to secure. It's not in line, it doesn't change any it doesn't modify the kernel. So what the VEN does is it collects telemetry information about the workload and its connection. So the port, processes, the protocols, connections, and flows between workloads. It then forwards this information to the PCE, which is the second part of the solution. The PCE, or the Policy Compute Engine, it takes all the information about the legitimate connections and behavior of the application from the VEN, and then the PCE uses this historical information about the workload connectivity to recommend the applicable firewall rules. Okay, here, let me see if all right, so this allows the user to define the appropriate level of granularity, also allows the user to model and test the policies. Now, the way it works is via RBAC, you can have an application owner create the policies, and then you can have the security team review and approve those policies, basically provision these policies. Once these policies are provisioned, it transmits these instructions, the PCA transmits these instructions back to the VEN. And then what the VEN does is it programs the layer 3, layer 4 stateful firewall of each host. So in Linux, it's IP tables. In Windows, it's Windows filtering platform. And then there's similar approaches for Solaris and other legacy hosts. The PCE also integrates with popular vulnerability management tools like Qualys, Rapid7. So that way, if you have that integration, you can overlay vulnerability map information on the application dependency map, and this will show you the potential attack pathway of a malicious attacker. So then you can then refine your existing segmentation rules to lower your exposure. And then just as a quick summary of the Illumio benefits, so Illumio lets you see in real time what you need to protect. So then it also allows your application owners, the security, the network to collaborate in designing and executing your PCI segmentation strategy. And then you can also respond quickly to changes in your environment and your connections so that you mitigate the risk that you have outdated or misconfigured firewall rules, especially when you're segmenting like out-of-scope systems for your PCI environment. And then the next few slides are really just proof points. These are based on research that we've done where we hired like a third party. And these are comments from our customers based on Gartner Peer Insights, which you can look into. And then now I will go into the demo. So let me get out of this and go into my demo. Oops, I can't remember my password, so I have to find my cheat sheets. I'll start with service now. So let me type in my password. All right, so let me start that. And let me also log into my own instance. All right. So while we're doing this, I want to talk about the couple of key concepts. So I think I've mentioned earlier that we have the VEN, and the VEN is, the VEN is paired with the PCE. So, and then the VEN collects all this telemetry information. So the other thing I wanted to remind you is, like, for in Illumio's parlance, a workload is a server instance that's running on a host. It could be bare metal, it could be a VM, it could be a cloud instance, it could be a containerized host. And so when you first pair the VEN with the PCE, the Illumination application dependency map will give you this. So you have here, you see you have 156 workloads, and because you're only relying on network information in the flow, when I click on it, where is it? Yeah, it's not showing like all these relationships. So it's very difficult to understand what the flows are. So what we do is, a lot of customers have systems of records. They're either using a CMDB or a vCenter or an Excel file. So we use this system of records to create these labels. So what I'll do now is we have actually an application with ServiceNow. It's a plugin, and you can get it in their the store. I forgot what ServiceNow calls their store, but you get their app store, and you can download this for free in the app store. And what this shows you is will help you, the app. This will help you create your labels and sync up your CMDB fields to the PCE labels so that you can sync up your system of record to the PCE. So once you've done this, what we'll do is, when I go back, and it'll give me a few seconds to do this, it should start showing the map that I've talked about, and it's going to take a while. Application dependency map. While we're waiting for the application, for the map to refresh, let me just remind you of a couple of key concepts. See if this is refreshing. It's taking a while. Saying here it's waiting for ServiceNow to update. All right. Let me see if I log out and log back in, if that works, because sometimes it does that. Okay. My map is taking a long time. Yes, it is showing that it is reassigning those labels. Okay, let's see.
Maybe if I could just chime in.
Right, yeah.
Vivian, while you work on the technical difficulties, maybe I could just open it up and see if there's any questions from the participants.
Sure.
And then, more than happy to turn it back over to you. Emily, did we have any questions come in while Vivian was presenting?
It's supposed to be labeling. I don't know why it's not showing up. Hey, Berkeley, can you pull Neil to come in, please? See why the labels aren't showing. Oh, there it is. Taken a while. It was slow. It was slow.
We did have
now
one
we have
question. One question, but keep going, Vivian. No, keep going.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So it took a while to refresh, but here we are. So you can see, earlier we had 156 workloads, but it really wasn't showing you any concept. But as I've mentioned to you, in Illumio, we encourage the user to describe a workload across 4 dimensions, like the role. So what is the web, is it a web, a database, or a processing tier? The application, meaning is it an HR, a point of sale, a CRM system? What environment is it on? Is it dev, test, or prod? And then its location. So when you do that, and then once you've synced up your system of record, like a CMDB with the PCE, it comes up with this. And think of this as like a Google map. And so here you have like 6 data centers. And then when you click on it, it actually tells me that, within the California data center, there are 11 applications. And then if I click on a particular application, for example, I click on PCI, it will tell me that the PCI environment has a total of 7 workloads, 2 web, 3 processing, and 2 database tiers. And it also shows all these different connections. These are what we call our connected groups. And if I click on it, so there's 2 ways to do this. I either click on this icon on the right or look at the map itself. It tells me that it's connected to the ordering application, the core services, the IoT, as well as the point of sale application in New York. So what I want to do is, if I'm the application owner, I want to be able to do this at scale and do this efficiently. So I will want to go into an app group map view. And so in the app group map view, I'm no longer, I'm seeing all the connections for my point of sale application, and it's independent of the location. And this is how I want to write my policies. And so what this red line tells me is, there are connections across these environments, but it doesn't have any policies yet. If I click on this, it tells me that there's an IP list for a list of like point of sale devices that are connecting to my PCI environment. The reason why it's considered as an IP list is because there are no agents in these devices. There's no VEN, but we can create a rule in place to say only specific devices are allowed to talk to this particular PCI environment. And then here, if I click on the consuming groups, basically the consuming groups are applications that are allowed to consume services from the point of sale application. It tells me that you have the ordering application, the core services, and the IoT devices. So these are, in many cases, what you would define as your connected systems. The same thing with providing groups. If I click on the providing groups, these are the applications that this PCI application is allowed to talk to. But when I click on the providing group, it will tell me that in addition to PCI, it is also connecting to other parts of the environment. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my point of sale application. And then I want to start writing my rules. And to do that, I will start policy generator. And policy generator has already made recommendations based on the application's behavior. So what I want to do is, let's say I want to start some extra scope rule. I'll click on core services. And I can see here that, you can choose the level of granularity in terms of the rules that you want to write. You say like, for all services, you want to do it to specify the rules for individual services by role. Or if you have a vulnerability map, which I'm not going to demo today, you can actually have an ability to define your segmentation down to the port and process level. So these are just at the high level. And then you can actually review the rules individually, so that way you can, again, as I think we've mentioned, we make recommendations on the applicable firewall rules. That way, if you are a provisioner, so if you are the security team, you can review this and you can decide whether you want to include or exclude those rules. So you can adopt it. In this case, I'll just accept it as is. When I go next, I will be able to review all these rules. I save it. Once I save it, right now, I am I'm logging in as the app owner. So this way, when I go back into my view, let's go back to elimination and go back to PCI, it should tell me, let's see, I grab view, I saved it. It's taking a while. This should turn to green, but this is basically how it's supposed to work. It's really slow today, so I apologize for that. The provisioning is taking some time, but basically the way it works is once I have approved these rules, these red lines should turn to green. And then from an auditing standpoint, we have this capability called Explorer. So for example, if you are a control owner and you are asked to say like, hey, typically you'll provide an attestation to say, I have done this segmentation. You'll also be asked to, provide some artifacts. This is where you will say, okay, so I am looking for PCI and I want to run a report, and let's just say all actions within, I will say, the last month, go. And then it will, there are two ways that I can see this report. It will show that, these are the IP addresses that have connected to my PCI environment. These are the PCI to PCI connections. And then these are the other production applications that have connected to my PCI environment. And these are the ports and processes and protocols. Now, this is the parallel coordinate view, but if you're actually going to run a report, you want a table view. This is something that you can export into Excel. And this will show me what were the connections that were potentially blocked. I think they've only showed the what was connections potentially blocked. What's also important is what were the observed flows during that time period, when it was first detected and when it was last detected. So think of this as a way to, as an artifact, if you want to be able to demonstrate whether you have met your PCI, segmentation objectives. So with that, I think this is the end of my demo. I'm going to open it up to Q&A.
Okay, perfect. So there's a question, can a lack of proper segmentation have compensating controls implemented to address descoping? That's probably for Jason.
Yeah, that's a good question. So no, you cannot use compensating controls to address segmentation or to modify your scoping. So the short answer is no. You cannot use compensating controls there.
Perfect. And then there's one more question. So if they already have PCI segmentation using SDN and firewalls, how do they build a use case? They're asking for kind of some business reasons why they go to this new kind of segmentation.
Sure, yeah, so I can take a stab at that. So I think, as I've mentioned earlier, when customers come to us with, for PCI segmentation, they've already tried using SDN or firewalls because they have an existing PCI program, they have segmentation in place, and they've already either told by their QSA that, your network's too flat, you failed your pen test, or maybe they've underscoped, and their options are either, fix your segmentation and scoping problem, or consider everything as in scope for PCI. So with that, they come up with, in order to build a business case, they really have to come up with, initially, with their assumptions in terms of what is their current PCI environment, in terms of their assumptions, in terms of their list of assets, what they should segment, and then also, like, if they were going to start expanding, and doing more granular segmentation using their existing solutions, whether it's SDN or their firewalls, like, how much time and effort is required to design their more fine-grained segmentation for PCI? Also, what are the resources that they need, how much they would cost, and what's the downtime? And then, when they take these assumptions in place, they also look into whether, once they run their POC, they need to figure out, like, do they have visibility to validate that their assumptions about their environment? What is the connected systems? What is the security impacting systems? What is out of scope? Are these accurate? Is there a way for them to validate this? Once they have that, and they look into whether they can enhance their visibility. Then they start comparing, the cost of doing their more granular segmentation using the existing technologies and just expanding their use of the existing technologies, meaning buying more of the same, and also looking at, alternative solutions and looking at it from a TCO perspective. That's how you build a business case.
And then a question about the time it takes to get it up and running and that sort of thing.
So it comes down to your environment. And when we say it comes down, it's a classic response from consulting, right? Like it depends. But if you have, for example, like a very good asset management or a system of record system, and then if you already have agreement within your key stakeholders, like your application owners, your IT ops team, your security team, your networking team, in terms of what your segmentation priorities are going to be. Once you've done that, you've done your design, you've had agreement in terms of how you're going to do your labeling and your governance. It's pretty straightforward in terms of how you deploy and how you start using the application. But so since I'm not in professional services, I would actually defer to our PS team if you have additional questions in terms of how long it would take you to deploy the application.
Perfect. All right, well, we're almost to the top of the hour, so I think we'll wrap it up here. Jason, you want to close it out?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending today, the great questions, and more so, understanding that segmentation is more than a technology, it's more than a process. It's really a culmination of the people, processes, and technologies in your environment. And then I would just encourage everybody on the call and the participants that if you have questions in the future, please shoot them over to us. I'll make sure that I get on it and I can work with the team to get you the answers that you deserve. So with that being said, I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone, and I hope everybody has a good day.
Thank you. Bye.